Well, dandelion is one of the many non-native species that calls our park and region home. Over the course of 2 episodes, we showed you a lot of the exotic plants and animals that now reside in Steele Creek Park and the surrounding area. Oh, this is quite a sight to find. So here we are looking for non-native species, and we found one. It's not the butterfly, it's the plant that it's nectaring on. You know, one thing we talked about in the last episode, and we're going to hit on it this episode as well, is just because something is non-native doesn't make it bad, and I'm doing air quotes while I say that. Things in nature aren't always bad and good or black and white. There's a lot of nuance involved. And just because a species is not native, we talked about, you know, it may still have value either to us or other parts of wildlife. So here we have a very native butterfly. That's a great spangled fritillary. Absolutely gorgeous gem of the summertime skies. And there it is nectaring on a non-native thistle plant. It came over from Europe, I believe. Still terrible. If you remember, we also introduced you to some common edible non-native plants. All right, well, whenever we talk about foraging for wild edibles, and especially those that are non-native to our area, the first thing that should come to mind is the dandelion. Dandelions, oftentimes I hear folks talk about, oh, dandelion wine. No, the uses of dandelion go way beyond dandelion wine. Hopefully we're all familiar with dandelions. This is a common yard green. This here is the flower of the dandelion. The popular thing that we blow, this right here, is actually the fruit of the dandelion. So instead of having fleshy fruit like an apple, it has this fruit that's adapted into a seed dispersal mechanism. But of course, the plant is more than just the flower and the fruit. Dandelion is also recognizable by these leaves that are sort of sword-shaped or kind of Christmas tree in shape, growing around the base of the flowers or the fruits. Dandelion is entirely edible, from its roots to its tips. You can throw these greens directly into salads. You can cook them as a cooked green. The flowers are edible and are a wonderful addition to salads. And the root was often dried and actually used as a coffee substitute by early settlers to the Americas. And medicinally, it's been shown to be a pretty strong diuretic. It'll actually make you lose water if you drink that dandelion root. The greens have been likened to kale if you like bitter greens. It's not everybody's favorite, but I love them. Well, whether an evergreen gymnosperm like this white pine I'm in, or some deciduous hardwoods like oaks and hickories, we've got a whole episode where we introduce you to some of the biodiversity of woody plants in Steele Creek Park. There wasn't a lot of bite in that episode, but there sure was a lot of bark. Well, while many trees can be identified by their trunks and their bark and things that are close to the ground, oftentimes when we're leading hikes for public visitors, or if we're doing a show like this, it's best to show leaves of a tree from very small specimens. Obviously, this red maple here will get much larger when it's fully mature. But at this size, all the canopy leaves are really close to the ground, and so it lends itself very well to being shown and understood and talked about. So this right here is a classic maple leaf. While there are many different species of maple that occur in our area, the red maple is a common one that you'll find here in Steele Creek Park's woods. Our new and expanded Nature Center opened in fall of 2017, and we have a bird exhibit that shows a beautiful transition between fall and winter. We've got an episode where we show you what a lot of different species do during that transition between fall and winter. Even though the water stops flowing in this creek, if you know where to look for it, you can still find some water, especially water that is hiding underneath rocks and crevices. Even the fall leaves that coat this creek bed can all help to hold moisture close to the ground. So a lot of our species, especially some of the salamanders and the crayfish, they'll actually stay in or near the creek bed, but they alter their habits to get into places where they can still find water, at least to where maybe they can keep their gills wet. And here we found just such a spot in the creek. Well, it certainly doesn't look like much, just a little puddle of water here that could maybe just fill up a soda bottle cap or maybe a little bit more. And obviously we don't see any wildlife with the naked eye. Of course, there's plenty of living things in there. But what it does show is that even when the creek bed is dry, there's still water to be found if you know where to look for it. Well, one thing that's always fun to do is to think about the cycle of nutrients through an ecosystem. It's tied closely to the cycle of life. And so when you think about it, everything on the surface of the earth, every living organism, ultimately is solar powered, right? Because we know that plants take the sun's light energy and they convert that into chemical energy, and animals eat the plants and some animals eat other animals. Okay, so all the energy that's usable on the surface of the earth ultimately goes back to the sun. It's turned into energy that we critters can use through photosynthesis. Plants make chemical nutrients that we can eat. So you see all these leaves in the fall. This is a very important part of the food chains of the near future. As the snows melt and the spring rains come and this creek bed fills back up, these leaves are going to begin to decay. And that decay forms the basis of the food chain for many of our aquatic ecosystems. So the leaves that fall this fall will have very important effects in the coming year. The Nature Center's black rat snake has probably touched more human hands than you have. This is the most agreeable snake that there ever has been, and he features prominently in our episode about squamates, which are snakes and lizards. Let's move on to everybody's favorite squamates. Let's talk about the native serpents to our area. Yeah, this gets a lot of bad publicity sometimes. People are afraid of snakes. But in fact, the more you learn about snakes, the less scary they can become. In our region, we have over 20 species of snake native to the area. Of those, only 2 species are venomous. We have locally the northern copperhead, which is venomous, and we also have the timber rattlesnake. Although the timber rattlesnake is not nearly as common and is actually a threatened species in the state of Tennessee. All the other snakes are relatively harmless, and we have snakes that occupy a variety of habitats. There are arboreal snakes, snakes that live in trees, like black rat snakes oftentimes do. There are snakes that live underground, like the northern brown snake, and also several of the blind earth snakes. We also have snakes that occupy other habitats, like the water snakes, the northern water snake. That's the snake that is oftentimes confused for cottonmouths in our area. We don't have cottonmouths, but we do have the northern water snake, which is a pretty convincing mimic of cottonmouths. We also have queen snakes, which spend most of their time in and around water, and many, many more. Snakes, of course, are reptiles like lizards, and they're actually pretty closely related to lizards. In fact, snakes come from ancestors that actually had legs and would have looked a lot like the lizards we have today. But if you see just the head of a squamate sticking out maybe from under a rock, how can you tell if it is a snake or if it's a lizard? Well, that's pretty simple. Snakes don't have eyelids, or at least they have eyelids that are fixed and they don't ever move. Lizards, on the other hand, actually have eyelids that can blink. So if you see an unknown squamate and you're looking at him in the face, watch him for a while. If it blinks, it's a lizard. If it doesn't, you're probably looking at a snake peeking out from under the rock. With 5 different creeks and the lake that you can find in Steele Creek Park, it's no surprise that we have a lot of different species of fish. In one episode, we took you into the woods and onto the lake to find some of those fish that call the park home. Here in the Nature Center, there's a few species that you can find on display. Well, it may not look like much. This just looks like a puddle to almost anybody. But this amount of water, less water than you could fit into a bathtub, up in the woodland valleys, this is the stronghold for our rare fish. This is where you can find the Tennessee dace, Chrosomus tennesseeensis. And this species, during the wet season, the stream will be wet and with running water, and the fish can move about wherever they want to go. But as we get into the dry season in the summer and the fall, most other fish species will go downstream to look for more permanent bodies of water. The Tennessee dace doesn't do that. It stays right where it's at, and in some cases even goes further upstream into these little pools that maybe almost completely dry up during the dry season, but sometimes you can find these Tennessee dace in them. So we've got our little fish net handy. We don't want to disturb the habitat too much, but I've seen several just darting all around here. I'll see if I can catch one and see if we can get a closer look. Oh, we got a big one. We got a big one. We got a big one. Oh, let's take a look here. I'm not sure if it's a dace, but we've got a big fish here. All right, we've got this big guy in the photographic tank, and oh, it appears to be a creek chub. This is a good species to get, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not the Tennessee dace that we came here for this morning. This is a species that he actually won't last long in this habitat, very likely. They typically will find deeper water as the seasonal creeks dry up. But these are also voracious eaters. If there are some of the rare Tennessee dace in this puddle, he might actually be a pretty significant threat to them. That's okay, it's still a good find, and it's good to be able to show it to you at home. We've gone back into Quarry Cave. No, I'm just kidding. We're in the Nature Center's exhibit cave again. I can't believe you fell for that one twice.
All right, so said it before, I need to say it again. Caves are wonderful places to find diverse and fascinating wildlife. So the cave environment is very stable. It's very secure. It's roughly the same temperature year round. It's humid year round. It's typically gets the same amount of wind or not at all year round. The microenvironment is very stable, so it's a great place for wildlife if they can tolerate the dark. Caves are the only place in the world where you can get true and total dark. If you think about that, even the deepest ocean trenches, you actually have organisms that have adapted huge eyes to allow tiny bits of light in. In caves, you've got the opposite. You've got organisms that have adapted to having no eyes at all. They've adapted to blindness because the cave environment has no light except for the light that we bring in. So if the animals can get by without light, they can find a lot of interesting resources in caves. So here we have a number of flies that are flying around. Those are called cave flies. But we've also got all this material that was brought in by a critter that's often called a pack rat, but it actually goes by a truer name, which is called the Allegheny wood rat, is who probably did this. It could be a couple of other rodent species as well, but they form these middens where they find these little tucked away places back in caves, and they make their little home, and this is the remains of one of those nests behind. Something I haven't found today that I usually find in this cave are camel crickets, which are oftentimes called cave crickets, but they're actually called camel crickets. You might be familiar with those. Some people are horrified of them, unnecessarily. You find them in basements a lot and in garages. Those are those really large humpbacked crickets with the big back legs. Totally harmless, but they do really well in this environment as well.
Well, you don't have to take a 35-mile hike to see some amazing things in Steele Creek Park. Remember, if we train our eyes to look at things very, very small, there's a universe in every direction. Looky here. We have got a small mite or some other arachnid that is actually crawling around in this moss. Probably doesn't like the light that I'm shining on it. Look, here are some structures of the moss itself. We might be able to change our light and our focus. Remember, even though this piece of moss that we found was only, it wasn't much bigger around than a quarter. Remember, this is a whole world to tens of thousands or millions of microscopic creatures and single-celled organisms. We found that tiny little mite. There's something else I was sort of hoping we would find in here today. Is a group of animals that occur worldwide, and they are very tiny. And they go by some really colorful names like moss piggies or water bears. They're actually their own phylum of animals called tardigrades. And they're really cute as tiny insect-like creatures can be. And one of their favorite habitats is moss. And while I'm not finding any in this sample, we do know they occur in Steele Creek Park and pretty much every other habitat in the world that you look for them. So cool. Well, in warmer weather, especially after a few days of rain, that's a great time to find a lot of different species of wild mushrooms. We sure found a lot when we went looking for them in Steele Creek Park. Okay. Wow, so mushrooms are incredibly interesting. They're very important in nature. Lots of our fungi are decomposers. They grow, from the ground, and they're growing on dead and decaying plant matter oftentimes, and just organic matter in general. They come in a huge diversity. Of course, not all of them are mushrooms or fall under this toadstool shape. You also have the familiar shelf fungi that you might see growing out of the side of a rotten log or a tree that's got an injury to it. And then as far as the typical mushroom-shaped fungus goes itself, those come in a couple of very important distinctions. You either have the gilled mushrooms, and you can see those gills underneath this mushroom here. And some of the others, this is a gorgeous big fat specimen we found laying down, probably of a fungus called Old Man of the Woods, although this is an interesting look. This does not appear to have gills. This is a mushroom, but it's not a gilled mushroom. And of course, there are lots of other fungus as well. There are the cup fungi, the sac fungi. There are the fungi that are microbial and sometimes attack our garden plants. Some of the smuts and the rusts are different kinds of funguses. There is enormous diversity out there in nature, and even at Steele Creek Park. Well, we've certainly had a good time bringing you the Steele Creek Explorer over all these years, and we'll continue to bring these to you as long as you'll keep watching them. But whether you're reliving old memories or making some new ones, I recommend Steele Creek Park, because here's where you can be the explorer.